June marks the final month. The United States Supreme Court is in session, and with just over 2 weeks left, there are 3 cases which could potentially have an impact on the 2020 election. For the second time in a year, partisan gerrymandering is in front of the justices. There's also a question about adding the citizenship question to the 2020 census, along with a First Amendment case involving a 40-foot cross on public land in Maryland. Joining me now from Washington is Kim Wehle. She's a CBS News legal analyst. Kim, welcome. Great to have you with us.
Thank you.
So the Supreme Court heard the partisan gerrymandering case last year, but wasn't quite ready to take a step forward with it. Do you think this time will be different?
Well, the Supreme Court has had a hard time with gerrymandering because there is no agreement on what test. I think many people believe that gerrymandering is a problem for democracy. It's a problem for ensuring that every voter, when they cast their ballot, it really matters. Because essentially gerrymandering in these 2 cases, one in Maryland and one in North Carolina was pro-Republican, Maryland was pro-Democrat. Gerrymandering is about carving up districts, voting districts, to ensure that they go for one party over the other and really drown out the minority vote in that sort of bizarre-shaped district. And so the court has had a hard time, deciding whether this is proper for the court to get into at all. There's something called the political question doctrine, where the court says, this is really so political, we're going to stay out of it. And even if they did get into it, what would the test be? But given they took another case, I think it's likely that there will have some ruling on this beyond just, listen, we're not going to say anything. But we never know with this new court.
I mean, gerrymandering is so tricky because there's no clear definition of how the districts are supposed to be drawn, how they're supposed to be defined. I wonder if the court will finally weigh in on that and make some sort of standard.
Right. If they decide that it's something they can consider at all. The court has a tremendous amount of discretion. As I mentioned, it's essentially say, we are out of this business. But if they're out of this business, the problem is there's no place else for voters to go to fix the problem. Mm-hmm. You can't go back to the very legislators that are carving up districts to favor their own party. And for lots of reasons, we are pretty entrenched in a 2-party system. So a third party or fourth party coming in to represent the voices of new voters that aren't happy with either Republican or Democrat, that's not very realistic. So one hopes that the Supreme Court does say something about gerrymandering so we can move beyond it.
All right. Another issue, though, that has the potential to turn very political on the docket is the citizenship question on the 2020 census. The Trump administration says the question would provide valuable data to help the Justice Department enforce the Voting Rights Act. But opponents recently discovered new evidence that the real goal is to benefit Republicans and white voters. Will this evidence be addressed by the court?
These 2 cases, actually, the gerrymandering case and the census case, the one thread that's consistent is the question of race. Some people say with gerrymandering, it's about drowning out minority voices. The problem with the census case, arguably, is that the Department of Commerce added this citizenship question, asking respondents, what is your citizenship? It hasn't been asked since the 1950s, for the purpose of basically scaring immigrants from responding to the census. The census determines how many members of Congress in the House of Representatives each state gets, and it determines how much money. And it's based on head count. It's not based on whether you are actually citizens. It counts bodies in the state. So the more immigrants, people of color generally, that are counted, the more the power of those minority groups grows in that particular state. So that's why this is a huge question underlining this of race. And the other element here is, did the Justice Department not tell the truth in open court in the trial on this question when it said this wasn't, as you mentioned, about making sure that certain voters had a stronger voice, that is, white voters, but it was really about protecting minority rights under the Voting Rights Act. I think that's going to be a hard thing for the Justice Department to support. But really, at the end of the day, from a legal perspective, the question of adding the citizenship didn't follow a statute called the Administrative Procedure Act, regardless of race. So the court might hang on to that easier question without getting into this additional evidence that came to light last month or 2 months ago.
Great observations, Kim. All right, now the court will also be deciding on whether the Constitution permits a 40-foot cross that serves as a World War I memorial on public land in Maryland. This is a fascinating case, Kim. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
So this cross was built 93 years ago to represent World War II veterans. It's a World War I memorial. And at some point after its creation, the state of Maryland took over supporting and maintaining the cross. The Constitution and the First Amendment to the Constitution says that Congress shall make no law establishing religion. This is known to some people, or in common knowledge, as the separation of church and state. But the words separation of church and state are actually nowhere in the Constitution. So the question for the court is, what does it mean that the government shall make no law respecting religion?
Right.
Does that mean that they can't do anything about religion? The argument here is by having this very large cross, 40-foot cross, on public land, the government's endorsing Christianity and marginalizing other religions. The counter-argument is, so long as they're not affirmatively endorsing, they're not coercing people to become a certain religion, they're not declaring Christianity the religion of the United States, it is not a problem. And this is where I think we'll see the more liberal and the conservative wing of the court depart from each other.
All right. Well, Kim Wehle, we thank you so much for your insight into all of these cases. Thank you.
Thank you.